This is lesson 5.1c, decimal and percent conversions. You will need pages 11 and 12 to take notes. So the first definition that we have is a percent. Percent means parts per 100. So a percent tells you the ratio out of 100. So it just means out of 100. So let's say you have 75%. That means it would be 75 out of 100. If you have 60%, that means 60 out of 100. So a percent means the value out of 100. So for numbers 1 through 3, it says each hundredths grid represents one whole. Write the shaded part as a fraction in simplest form, decimal, and percent. So there's a total of 100 squares. In each of these examples. So the number that are shaded in for number 1, remember that this is a 10 by 10 grid, so that means that there's 10 going down, 10 units shaded down, and then we have 11, 12, 13. So as a fraction, this would be 13 out of 100. So since 13 and 100 don't have anything in common, we can't simplify it. So as a decimal, so this means 13 hundredths. So this would be 0.13. Then as a percent, remember that a percent means out of 100. So if you have 13 out of 100, that's just 13%. Number 2, you have 10 in each column. So since there's 6 columns shaded in, so there's 6 columns of 10, so we have 60 out of 100, which if we reduce it, because 60 and 100 are both even, so they're going to be both divisible by 20. So 60 divided by 20 is 3. 100 divided by 20 would be 5. So 60 over 100 simplifies to 3/5. As a decimal, remember that 60 over 100 means 60 hundredths. So again, this would be 0.60. And then as a percent, remember a percent means out of 100. So if this is 60 out of 100, then as a percent, it would be 60%. Number 3, we only have 1, 2, 3, 4 units shaded in. So we have 4 out of 100 units shaded in. So you can simplify this. Divide the numerator and denominator by 2, and you get 2/50. You can keep dividing by 2, and you get 1/25. Okay, remember that a decimal means you have 4 hundredths. So since it's 4 out of 100, that means you have 4 hundredths. So this would be 0.04. And percent means out of 100. So if you have 4 out of 100, that's just 4%. Okay, number 4. We want to shade in the grid for the given percent. And then we want to write the shaded part as a simplified fraction and as a decimal. So now you're given 35%. Remember, 35% means 35 out of 100. So that means you're going to shade in 35 squares. So you should have 35 out of the 100 squares shaded in. So 35 out of 100, we want to simplify that fraction. And if you divide the numerator and denominator by 5, you get 7/20. So now as a decimal, 35 hundredths would be 0.35, or you can add 0 as a placeholder, 0.35. So 80% means 80 out of 100. So a percent means out of 100, so that means you write 80 out of 100, and then you can reduce 80 over 100, you can divide by 20, and that would be 4/5. Okay, so as a decimal, 80 hundredths would be 0.80. So go ahead and shade in 80 out of the 100 squares to show 80%. So you should have 80%, 80 units shaded in, or 8 columns of 10 shaded in. Number 6, you want to write 7% as a fraction. So 7% means 7 out of 100, which 7 and 100 don't have anything in common, so you can't reduce. So now as a decimal, 7 out of 100 means 700, so you can write that as 0.07, and you can shade in 7 of these squares. So you have 7 out of the 100 squares shaded in.